Good morning, and welcome to this program titled Walking the Line, New Jersey Ballots, Candidates, and Voters, presented by the Eagleton Institute of Politics in partnership with the Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Let me say, my name is John Weingart. I'm Associate Director of the Eagleton Institute. Let me say at the outset, we're recording this session so that it will be available on the Eagleton website within about a week. If you want to recommend it to others or see it yourself again, please, we encourage that. We have a distinguished and very well-informed panel of people, 5 people, to speak this morning on this general topic, or maybe specific topic, that we're calling Walking the Line for the moment. As political discourse and conduct have changed in such enormous and mostly disturbing ways in recent years, one positive trend is that to some extent political literacy has risen compared with 5 or 10 years ago. Many more people know much more, for example, about the process and impact of gerrymandering. Many people even know about Elbridge Gerry, for whom it's named, the governor of Massachusetts from 1810 to 1812, and also the country's 5th vice president. Many more people know about how the impeachment process works, and that for a president to be impeached doesn't mean they're automatically removed from office. At least in recent weeks, many more people know about budget reconciliation, and that it's a process that's been there a long time, but more people understand what it is and to some extent how it's used. And in New Jersey, I think that's also true of what's generally referred to as the line, that it's a phrase that people very immersed in politics in New Jersey have used for years and know what they're talking about, but most other people, even those who follow politics pretty closely, haven't. But it's come to the forefront in the past year, perhaps, in large part due to the ongoing research and writing of Julia Sass Rubin, who is our first presenter this morning. Among other ways in which she is brought to the forefront is an article she wrote in the American Prospect magazine last summer, and two research reports published by New Jersey Policy Perspective over the last year as well. More recently, a way this issue has come to prominence is the results of the 2021 Democratic primary in New Jersey, which I think Julia will get to. But in that race, in that election statewide, one of the races that got the most attention was the race to succeed to rise to the state Senate in the 37th district, where the 2 assembly members, Jordan Johnson and Valerie Veneri Huddle, were competing for the nomination to the Senate. 2 years ago, when they were running for the assembly on a ticket together, they received almost exactly the same number of votes, 22,000 votes each, with one having about 100 votes more than the other. In the primary earlier this month, one of them had 75% of the vote and one of them had 25% of the vote. And exploring why that happened leads to discussion of the line as well. Just a moment here. So we're going to hear from a presentation and then comments from 4 other speakers, and then have a question and answer some time for questions and answers. If you have a question you'd like to be addressed, put it in the question and answer box, and we'll get to as many of those as we can later in the program. We may combine some to get to more people to have their questions addressed. So with that as introduction, Julia Sass Rubin's presentation this morning is titled, Does the County Line Matter? An Analysis of New Jersey's 2020 and 2021 primary elections. Julia Sass Rubin is Associate Professor at the Bloustein School of Planning and Public Policy, and I'm delighted to welcome her and introduce her to you.
Thank you very much, John. Let me just bring up my PowerPoint. So good morning, everybody. And as John mentioned, we've had a lot of focus at the national level on issues of democracy, particularly around voting restrictions and voter suppression and gerrymandering. And this, of course, is a focus on the general elections and the struggle for dominance between the parties. And today we're focusing on the struggle for dominance within the parties at the primary level, and of course, specifically in New Jersey. And I think it's important to start out by pointing out that in our state, the majority of general elections are not competitive at the New Jersey legislative district or county levels, and even some of the congressional districts. And so what that means is that for much of our state, winning the party primary is essentially the same as winning the general election. And that's why the focus on the primary is particularly important. And as John mentioned, I'm going to be focusing on primary ballots. And what I found is that New Jersey's primary ballots are quite unique. They are unlike in composite any other states. There are parts of the ballots that are similar to other states, but the combination is rather unique. In most states and the District of Columbia, ballots are somewhat like this, where the candidates are listed beneath the positions that they're seeking, as you see here in this 2018 Elko, Nevada ballot. In a few states, candidates are listed to the right of the position. This is an example from Delaware and from Philadelphia. A few other counties in Pennsylvania as well look like this. By contrast, in 19 of our 21 counties, primary ballots are organized around the county line, and some people refer to it as the party line, which is all the party endorsed candidates shown in either vertical or horizontal order on the ballot. So in this 2018 Camden Democratic primary ballot, the county line is in column 2. And in this 2021 Essex County Republican primary ballot, the county line is in row E. About 5 counties organize their ballots horizontally like this versus vertically. The county line provides candidates on the line with many advantages. So first of all, it's in prime ballot position, as you saw from those 2 examples. It's usually either in the first row or second row or the first column. And so the voter sees it most clearly when they walk into the voting booth. Second of all, it's headed by the best known candidate that cycle. So in 2018, it was Senator Menendez and the Democratic Party. Last year, of course, it was President Biden and former President Trump. This year, it'll be Governor Murphy. And so the candidates down ballot get the legitimacy from being connected to that individual. The candidates not on the county line are in separate columns or rows by design. And sometimes they're separated from those on the county line by blank columns or rows, which puts them further away from the voter's view when they're actually making the voting decisions. And in a few counties, they are actually grouped together, even though they're running against each other. So in this example from Camden, there are 3 people running for the House of Representatives. The incumbent is on the county line, and the 2 challengers are all the way over 6 blank columns away from him, and they're grouped together. So a voter might mistakenly vote for both of them and disqualify their vote. And this, as I think Whitney's going to speak to in much more detail and with much more expertise, violates rules of good ballot design. And I want to actually draw on Whitney's excellent work as well as that of her colleagues at the Brennan Center. And I'm just going to focus on one of these because I don't want to encroach on area that she knows much better. But the ballots essentially that we use in New Jersey essentially create murky contest boundaries. So voters cannot tell which candidates are running for each office. And what would a clear contest boundary look like? Well, what's recommended by the Brennan Center is machine ballots that look something like this. This is from a general election, but it doesn't really matter. But you have one screen at a time, which shows, one race at a time on the screen, so that you know exactly what you're voting for and who your candidate choices are. And of course, that's not what our machine ballots look like. In a paper ballot, it could look like the Nevada ballot that I showed you earlier. Again, it's very clear in each contest what the position is that the candidates are seeking and who the candidates are. That's not at all what our ballots look like. And to give you a few examples, it's difficult to tell the contest boundaries for governor's race in this Middlesex County 2017 Democratic primary ballot. Here's the governor's race up here. And as it turns out, there are 6 candidates. 5 of them are on the first row, And the sixth one is inexplicably on the second row and 4 columns over. So it's very easy for voters not to realize that all 6 candidates are running. Another example with bad contest boundaries is this Union County 2020 Democratic primary ballot. So if you look at the House of Representatives race, it's very difficult to tell who are the contenders. Well, it turns out there's one in the second column and 2 more all the way over on the right with 2 blank columns between them. Again, very unclear contest boundaries. The final example is this 2020 Mercer County Democratic primary ballot. And if you look at the House of Representatives race, it's again very difficult to tell who the contenders are. And it turns out there are 2 in column A, Christine Conforti and Stephanie Schmidt, and then a third one in column B. And so if you need instructions to help you understand who your choices are, you're much more likely not to vote with the full comprehension of who you can vote for. And so by blurring the contest boundaries, these ballots lead to voter confusion and result in overvotes and undervotes. And I found a lot of evidence of that in the 2020 primary. So one example, this Mercer County ballot that I just shared, because 2 candidates for the House of Representatives were both on the county line in column A, one beneath the other, voters overvoted by checking both of them. Even though it says vote for one over here, New Jersey voters are very conditioned to just vote the entire line. And so they voted for both of them, and a third of the ballots in that congressional contest were thrown out because they overvoted, which is an astronomical rate of overvote. So the obvious outcome of all this confusion around ballot design is that they encourage voters to vote the line because that is the clearest choice in front of them. And of course, they are also encouraged to vote the county line by the parties who sent out mailers like this from this June's election that Mercer sent out. But I've seen similar mailers in pretty much every county, which encourage voters to vote the line, but also suggest that the line consists of the only real members of that party. So this language, please come out and show your support, vote column A on June 8th for our Mercer County Democratic candidates. It's technically accurate. Those are the candidates that have been endorsed, but the suggestion is also implicit that those are the real Democrats. And so voters are trained year after year to vote the line. Not surprisingly, appearing on the county line provides candidates with a real advantage when it comes to election outcomes. We have historical data on this. We now, after the June primary, we are now 12 years since a legislative incumbent who had the county line has lost a primary. And if in case you're thinking that incumbents generally win, this is really out of alignment with the rest of the country. In fact, on June 8th, New Jersey and Virginia both held their primaries. And in Virginia, 5 state legislative incumbents lost just on June 8th. Nationally, last year, when most of the country held their primaries, 154 state legislative incumbents lost their primaries. Again, we have not had anyone with the county line lose in 12 years and counting. This is not just at the legislative level. Congressionally, I went back 50 years to see what history there is, and I found that no congressional incumbent on the county line or with the county line in the largest county in their district has lost a primary in the last 50 years, at least in New Jersey. Again, this is out of alignment. If we look at last year's primaries, just in 2020, 8 congressional incumbents nationally were defeated. So we have a very incumbent-friendly protection system as long as they get the county line, and I'll speak to that in a moment. I also looked at the 2020 primaries, which was an unusual primary in that everyone voted on paper. And we had a lot of counterfactuals of what happens when one candidate is endorsed in one county in their district and another candidate is endorsed in a different county, or when some ballots are county line and other ballots are more like the ballots being used nationally, what's known as office block. And what I want to share with you is there were 4 races where, as I mentioned, there were split endorsements, 3 congressional races and 1 statewide Senate race. And in those 4 races, the average margin between a candidate being on the county line in one county versus their opponent being on the county line in a different county was 35 percentage points. It ranged from 25 in the 2nd Congressional District Democratic primary to 50 in the Republican Senate primary. I want to share just one quick example. This is a nice, simple one. This is the 3rd Congressional District Republican primary. There were 2 candidates and 2 counties. Kate Gibbs was on the county line in Burlington, and David Richter was on the county line in Ocean. And not surprisingly, they each won the county where they had the county line. And the difference for Kate Gibbs of being on the county line in Burlington versus David Richter being on the county line in Ocean was 34 percentage points. For David Richter, the difference between being on the county line versus having Kate Gibbs on the county line was 35 percentage points. I also looked at the 2021 primaries, which didn't have as many counterfactual situations like that. There were a couple of split endorsements, but what was interesting in 2021 is that there were a lot of incumbent legislators who lost the county line for various reasons. That is rather unusual. And so we were able to test out what's more powerful, incumbency or the line. And I don't think it'll be giving away the secret if I say that the county line beat incumbency every time. So let me give you a few examples. John already mentioned one of them. So a 5-term Assemblywoman Betty Lou DeCroce lost her reelection. She ran in a district that has 3 counties. She had the county line in 2 of them, and she won one of the top 2 positions in both counties. But she was thrown off the county line in Morris, and she lost in Morris, and that cost her her reelection. Assembly members Oth and DeFicio were incumbents in the 39th Republican primary. They had the county line in Bergen. They were not on the county line in Passaic. And they did manage to win. I think Bergen is a larger chunk of their county, but it was a difference of 11 percentage points for them between being on the county line and not. And I just want to mention that margin does tend to be smaller for incumbents. Last year, there were no incumbents who had split endorsements, so I wasn't able to really measure that. The 35 percentage point average that I mentioned before, those were all non-incumbent candidates. So I did see a smaller margin for incumbents. This is quite a substantial difference, though, to see for members of the Assembly who, in the case of Assembly Member Oth, has been in the Assembly for a number of years. And this is quite a substantial performance difference. Assemblywoman and Deputy Republican Whip Masso lost her reelection after she lost the line in Monmouth. She's in a 1-county district, but again, had done well in her 2 prior primaries and general election contests. And finally, as John mentioned, Assemblywoman Veneri Huddle was competing against her Assembly running mate, Johnson, for the state Senate seat that was vacated going forward. And the results were very lopsided, 72% to 28%. I think, John, you shared slightly earlier results before some of the counting was done. And of course, Assemblyman Johnson had the line. What's interesting is that they had performed very similarly in prior elections. I actually looked at both primary and general elections for each cycle that they were both in. And as you can see, the difference between them was minimal, and it switched back and forth between them. Whereas in this primary lead, the difference was almost 6,400 votes. And the main change was that one of them was on the line and the other one was not. The results in 2021 were so dramatic that several journalists commented on it. So saying things like 2021 was the year of the line, or the line wins. But as I saw from the 2020 results and the historical results, it's not the 2021 is the year of the line. It's that in New Jersey, pretty much every year is the year of the line. So what impact does this have on our politics and policy? Well, I want to make 3 observations. First of all, how the endorsement process is made matters a great deal. And as it turns out, the small number of party insiders ultimately determine who wins the primary. And because, as I noted earlier, our primaries are essentially our general elections for much of the state, a small number of party insiders determine who wins the general election. The way that it's supposed to work in terms of the endorsement process is that each precinct elects at the primary level in each party 2 individuals to represent them in the party going forward. And those individuals roll into a municipal committee, which determines ideally the endorsements at the municipal level. So mayor, city council, all the municipal committees in the county then roll into a county committee. And in principle, the participants in that county committee, who are these precinct elected local Democratic and Republican activists, are supposed to determine endorsements for county level positions like commissioner and sheriff, and also for congressional and legislative positions that draw on the county, as well as statewide offices like US Senator and governor and president. There are a few counties that actually operate that way. And I have to say that Chairwoman Perez's county, from all the research I've done, is one of those counties. But for the most part, that's not how it works. And legally, based on New Jersey election law, the Republican and Democratic county party chairs essentially have the ability to make that decision. And what I have found is that in many counties, they do make that decision, or they make that decision in conjunction with a small handful of other people, perhaps the municipal chairs. One extreme example that came out in this election cycle was that of Assembly Majority Whip Nicholas Chiaravolati, who it turns out was not given the ability to run for re-election on the county line because of a long-standing agreement that dates back about 20 years and was put into effect when Senator Menendez was chair of the Hudson County Democratic Organization. And that agreement was that the mayor of Bayonne would essentially decide who one of the assembly members were for the 31st district, which is where Bayonne is. And the mayor of Jersey City would decide who the other assembly member was. So these two individuals, and it's always been men, would get to pick who represented the district in the assembly. And there was really no way to rethink their decision. It was final. The party did not intervene in that. The party at large did not intervene at that. So for whatever reason, the mayor of Bayonne decided he did not want to endorse Assemblyman Chiaravolati. And Assemblyman Chiaravolati knew that he would not win in the primary without being on the line. And because Hudson is such an overwhelmingly Democratic county, and in particular the 31st district, he decided not to run for re-election. So this is perhaps a very, very clear and somewhat extreme example. But even when we're not looking at something so dramatic, it does still come down to one individual who has the power to make that decision. And again, that's a decision that impacts the general election because the primaries are essentially the general election. So candidates understand how this works very well. And they understand that their political careers rest on those few individuals and pleasing them, not the voters, because the line is so powerful. And so we have all sorts of consequences of that when legislators are not accountable to the voters, including our lack of transparency, which was demonstrated very powerfully this week with a budget that was made public a few minutes before the legislature voted on it. And we have a long history in our state of inside deals and all the obvious consequences of that. Finally, this process substantially hinders the election of women and people of color at all levels of government. I want to draw on the excellent work of Jane Sinzak, who is the Associate Director of the Center for American Women in Politics at Eagleton. He wrote an editorial in early December highlighting just how few women were in elected office in New Jersey. This visual shows that at that point, there were only 17% of all mayors were women and only a third of all commissioners. But it goes much deeper than that, as she pointed out. We've never had a female senator. We've only had one female governor. Only 7 women have represented New Jersey in Congress, and 2 of them were elected in the last 6 years. And as recently as 2004, we were 43rd nationally in the percentage of women in the state legislature. We did move up by 2014 because a number of legislators were put in jail by Governor Christie when he was U.S. attorney, and that kind of opened up opportunity for some women to move up. But we have plateaued and started to move backwards. So we're now back down to 26th nationally in terms of percentage of women at just over 30%. And I would say this is a problem not just for women, it's also a problem for people of color who are also dramatically underrepresented. So non-Hispanic whites make up over 73% of all legislators versus just about 55% of New Jersey residents. Black legislators are actually Black communities pretty well represented among the legislature, but the Hispanic community is not. Hispanics make up about 7.5% of the legislators versus 21% of the state. And Asians are even more underrepresented in the legislature. They make up only 2.5% versus 10% of the state. And Dean points the finger for this in terms of women squarely at the county line. She wrote that valuable party line slots are frequently taken by people who emerge from the networks of the party chairs, which limits the ability of outsiders to break through. And as that network of insiders is already overwhelmingly male, and I would add white, New Jersey remains trapped in a negative feedback loop that privileges the emergence of male, and again, white candidates and disadvantages women and people of color. And I think that when you look at the demographics of the party chairs versus the demographics of the state, her point about representation becomes more apparent. So men make up about 74% of all the party chairs, and of course they make up slightly less than half of the state. Non-Hispanic whites account for 86% of the party chairs. This is for both parties in combination, and they again account for about 55% of the state. Blacks account for 7% of the party chairs versus 15% of the state. Hispanics account for 7% of the party chairs versus 21% of the state. And Asians are not represented at all in terms of the party chairs and are about 10% of the state. So what's the solution? Well, I think the obvious solution is to shift New Jersey's primary ballots from this, which is the county line ballot. It's actually Mercer's 2016 county line machine ballot. And it is just as confusing as the other examples I've shown you, with blank spaces between candidates running for the same office. Shifting it to this, which is actually the same election and the same ballot. But up through 2016, Mercer had an office block ballot for its paper vote by mail ballots and a county line ballot for its machine ballots. And you can see just how much clearer this ballot is. It's very obvious what the contest boundaries are. You can see who's running and what that position is. So that seems like a very simple solution to bring New Jersey in line with the rest of the country. And we can talk in the Q&A, and I'm sure that Brett will speak to this as well, about what the options are for getting us there. So with that, let me stop.
Thank you, Julia. Will your slides be available to one place or another? Or can we
Absolutely.
make them? Okay. And let me just repeat, among the places Julia's written about this is New Jersey Policy Perspective. And if you go to their website, several of her reports are there. Also, Julia made reference to Gene Sinstack and the Center for American Women and Politics. And if you'd like to see that report or more information about them, you can go to cawp.rutgers.edu. Joining us also this morning are four other knowledgeable, involved people in this issue. Brett Pugash is of counsel to the Bromberg Law Firm, LLC, and has a practice in voting rights and election law. Henal Patel is the Director of Democracy and Justice Programs at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and Henal is also a former Eagleton Fellow. Arlene Perez is a partner with the Dakotas Law Firm, chair of the Hunterdon County Democratic Committee, and treasurer for Latinas United for Political Empowerment. And Whitney Quisenberry is director of the Center for Civic Design, although she asked that I introduce her as a ballot design nerd. So we'll hear from the speakers in that order, starting with Brett Pugash. Are you muted, I think, Brett?
Yep, just got off mute. And thank you so much to the Institute for having me here today. Let me share my screen. All right, so we're going to talk, I'm basically tasked with talking about the historical context of the county line and more generally about the direct primary elections that we have now. And how did we, I think something to focus on through this presentation is, what were the reasons for instituting the direct primary, where voters get to participate in an election to decide who they want their party nominee to be at the general election? What were the reasons for putting that in place in the first place? And how did we get to where we are now? So in terms of the early history, for over 100 years, we did not have direct primary elections. What we had for our parties was essentially unregulated party conventions, kind of similar to the smoke-filled back rooms where you have a handful of party insiders that are making decisions about who the party's nominee is going to be. And then in the early 1900s, there's this kind of national progressive era reforms, and a big part of that push was for direct primary elections. And again, it's a national movement, and New Jersey is somewhat at the forefront of that. In 1903, New Jersey passes its first direct primary law specifically for local offices. And then throughout the next 10 or so years, it starts to get extended to other offices as well. In 1911, New Jersey passes the Jaron Act, which is approved by then Governor Woodrow Wilson, who obviously went on to become president. And Governor Woodrow Wilson was actually one of three of the most influential figures nationally in this reform movement era of trying to get direct primary elections passed in states throughout the country. And so the reason for passing the Jaron Act, it's basically done to break up the secret management of party machines. It's based on a frustration with and a distrust of party bosses and officials due to what was essentially a history of manipulation at party conventions. And the idea behind this is to transfer power from a handful of party insiders and give it directly to the people to have a say in who's going to represent them at the general election. And so with a primary election ushers in a period of state regulation, which really has the effect of weakening the kind of undue influence that the county parties had over the nomination process for primaries. Okay, and so the first piece of legislation, or one of the major pieces of legislation, comes about 20 years later, the 1930 primary endorsement ban, where New Jersey basically prohibits the official political party organizations from endorsing candidates prior to a primary election. Of course, the parties get smart. They always find ways to get around these things and circumvent. So they would do things like setting up screening committees, and the screening committees would make endorsements, or they would set up these social clubs, things like, if you've heard terms like regular Democratic organization, for example, which is separate. It's a separate entity from the party, but often consisted of similar membership. And so they would be able to make endorsements through that kind of sidestep process. And what made it powerful is that there was a law in New Jersey that allows for bracketing, which we've seen Professor Julia Sass Rubin's presentation. It's that feature, bracketing is that feature where candidates can be placed on the same column of the ballot with the same slogan, even though they're running for different offices. And this bracketing process really takes place at the county level, which is why our county parties are so strong. Meaning that if you're running for state senate and you want to be featured on the ballot with other candidates, you have to seek permission from the campaign manager of county freeholders, or now they're called county commissioners. So it's kind of this weird process. It's a somewhat unique feature to New Jersey. And then the laws in New Jersey actually don't say anything about the ballot placement of bracketed candidates, but through court decisions years ago, the court basically invents this idea of a preferential ballot draw and says that if you are part of a bracketed slate, then you're going to be put in an initial ballot draw, and your name can be drawn for the first position on the ballot, which of course gives an advantage. And the court also says that if you're not bracketed, then you could be put out in ballot Siberia at the discretion of the county clerks, as long as it's rooted in reason. And that's how we see these situations where candidates are featured multiple columns away from other candidates who are running for the exact same office. Another law that came later that also kind of weakened the undue influence of the county parties was the 1981 open primary law, which set up special rules on the ballot for candidates who are running for United States Senate and for governor. So for these statewide offices, what it did was it essentially siphoned off those offices away from all of the other candidates running for different offices on the ballot, so that you really couldn't have bracketing with those offices. And this was good in many ways, because it led to candidate-centered campaigns where voters were kind of forced to look at the different candidates and just decide among them which one they preferred, without this kind of influential effect of the visual cues of the ballot and the county line and everything else like that. Not going to get into a bunch of other factors, but suffice it to say that by the mid-1980s, the parties are kind of at their weakest level in terms of influencing the nomination process for primary elections. And so that all kind of changes in 1989 with a United States Supreme Court decision called U. And it dealt with a couple of different things, but I think the key piece is that California had a primary endorsement ban somewhat similar to New Jersey's, and the Supreme Court strikes this down. It says that the primary endorsement ban violates free speech and associational rights, and that political parties should have an ability to communicate who they think should be the nominee, and who they want to endorse prior to the primary election. And so New Jersey's law kind of gets thrown in limbo for about 20 years. It was never directly taken off the books, and in 2004, it's finally declared unconstitutional in a case called BATGO, which means that the parties were then free to endorse candidates before a primary election. 1 year later, we have kind of a definitive statement in a case called Schundler v. Donovan about the constitutionality of the 1981 open primary law, which was the special rules for Senate and governor. And the court basically says that you can't siphon them off from the rest of the candidates on the ballot. You have to allow for the ability to bracket. And this is all based on what the court says is a right to declare a ballot affiliation. And they say that this comes from you, but of course, this kind of seems to be at odds with the U decision itself. U doesn't talk about ballots at all. What U talks about is the ability to publicly announce your endorsement for a particular candidate in a primary election. But of course, the court kind of oversteps in the Schundler case and says that there's a right to declare a ballot affiliation. Of course, if there actually was a constitutional right to bracketing, then you would see bracketing in all 50 states and the District of Columbia and everywhere that we have elections. But of course, New Jersey is unique in this feature. I'm not going to get into campaign finance, but in the early 90s, there are laws that are passed that give tremendous fundraising abilities to the county parties, further strengthening them. And so we have a situation where the parties have really regained a ton of this control and a ton of influence over the nomination process. And, it seems as if we've kind of defeated the purpose of the direct primary election, which was meant to take, the undue influence away from the parties and give a voice to voters. Instead, we have a situation now where the ballot is used to, manipulate and influence voters. Voters are confused. Candidates who don't get the county line drop out, which limits voter choice in primary elections. And, I think from Professor Julia Sass Rubin's presentation, I think it's pretty obvious that the endorsement and obtaining the county line has basically become synonymous with winning the election. And that leads to a situation where candidates and even office holders are beholden to, the county party chairs and other party bosses. If they do as they're told, they can continue to get the line and will win re-election. If there's a vacancy, they may be tapped to take a higher position. But if they kind of vote out of step with the county party chair or do something else to anger a party boss, then the county line can be taken out from under them at the next election, and they will in all likelihood lose. So you have this state conferred ballot advantage that's wiping out challenges to power. It punishes dissent, and it stifles new ideas from entering the democratic marketplace. So the parties have figured out a way to use these unique features of the ballot in New Jersey to regain the control that the direct primaries sought to take away. And what I would submit is that just because we have voting in our primary elections doesn't mean that it's a fully functioning democracy. And I'll end with, I'm not here to talk about the lawsuit. I'm here based on my research, which talks about some of the different theories to show why the primary election ballots in this county line system is unconstitutional. So really quickly, burden on the right to vote. You have kind of two different things going on. The primacy effect, which social science shows that candidates that are listed first will get extra votes by certain voters just because they're listed first and for no other reason. And of course, in New Jersey, if you're an unbracketed candidate, you will not be able to participate in the preferential ballot draw, and you will have no chance of ever obtaining the first ballot position. Professor Julia Sass Rubin went through all the different visual cues and how that benefits certain candidates that are aligned with highly recognizable names in prime ballot position, all in the same column, as compared to those who are cast off into ballot Siberia, listed multiple columns away from candidates running for the same office. Under equal protection, we have similarly situated candidates who are not being treated equally, even though they're running for the same office. And finally, we have First Amendment associational rights violations, which includes the right to not associate. So in other words, candidates may not want to bracket. If you're running for town council, you don't want to get involved in a United States Senate race or a freehold, county commissioner race or presidential race for that matter. You just want to run against the other town council candidate. But if you don't bracket, then you will get punished for exercising that right to not associate. So we have a situation where candidates are facing this Hobson's choice, where they're forced to choose between their equal protection rights to a fair and decent ballot position versus their First Amendment right to not associate. And a quick update on the case. There was an amended complaint that was filed that challenges the constitutionality of the line. And it was joined by a number of candidates, both in the 2020 and in future primary election cycles, as well as by an organizational plaintiff, New Jersey Working Families Alliance. The defendants in that case filed a motion to dismiss, which means that they're trying to see if they can get the judge to throw the case out before we even get to discovery and putting on evidence and everything like that. Briefing is currently underway and will actually finish this week. And after that, we will await a decision from the judge. If and when, hopefully, we survive a motion to dismiss, then we would enter a phase of discovery where we can continue to gather evidence. And thank everyone for their time.
Thank you, Brett. If people want more information about the lawsuit, I think a New Jersey Spotlight has covered it. Is there another resource or place people can look for?
I think that a number of news outlets have actually been covering it. I know Working Families has a lot about it, I think on their website as well. And, there's court filings as well. I'm kind of limited in what I can say about the lawsuit, but there's certainly a lot of publicly available information.
All right, we'll try to get that. But thank you for your comments. Henal, Patel.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, John. I will just start off by adding a little bit to what Julia and Brett were saying. So as John mentioned, my name is Henal Patel. I'm the director of the Democracy and Justice Program at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. And in terms of the issue about the line, we support ending it, abolishing it because it's harmful to voters. And we recommended it last year in a report, which we published early last year, Our Vote, Our Power. And we said we should end that in New Jersey. It'll encourage actually more voter participation if we do, and lead to us having a government that actually represents the diversity of the state. And then in this lawsuit, we actually recently, with our co-counsel, Campaign Legal Center, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters of New Jersey and Salvation and Social Justice, we filed an amicus brief. And in that brief, and I will link to that here in case anyone is interested in reading legal briefs. Maybe just me, but some people might be. And it basically covers the issue of we lay out the fact that, one, we agree with the plaintiffs that this is harmful for voters. And we also go into some of the issues that Julia covered earlier about how the line often in New Jersey disproportionately does harm voters and communities of color. So one example being Camden. This election in June, this month, if you see their ballot, Camden, which is over 90% people of color, they had their mayoral race, a pretty important race when you think about it, wherein they had the other candidates in ballot Siberia. That means that the voters of Camden were prevented from having a real choice, an actual choice in who was going to be their mayor. And that's an issue. So there's an issue there. There's the issue that Julia really highlighted in Legislative District 31, Jersey City and Bayonne, also majority people of color districts, where one man, the mayor of Bayonne, ended up deciding in an entire race, not the voters of that district. So what it comes down to here is what we see often, and I hope this presentation highlights for you, is that the party line benefits party bosses. Democracy should be about the voters. It should be voters getting to decide whoever they want to elect to represent them. But with the party line, party bosses decide. If a party boss isn't happy with an incumbent, they take away the line, and even incumbency isn't enough to defeat it. Whatever the voters want doesn't matter. Party boss wants something else. This is where we are. This is why we have this is a major problem with our democracy here in New Jersey. So we do support abolishing it. But beyond the lawsuit, and I know if everyone's listening here today, and I know there's a question in the beginning, the first question that kind of asked, like, what do we do to increase attention to it? Well, one, I will say that as John mentioned earlier, we are in a moment right now where people are paying more attention to democracy and voting issues around the country and in New Jersey. It's, part of it is for, scary reasons, quite honestly. As someone who works in voting and is a voting rights advocate, it is a little terrifying to see where we are in this country on a lot of voting issues. But at the same time, there is the benefit here that people are paying attention to some ongoing issues that we've had for a really long time. So right now, there was actually a poll that came out just this week that said not only do a majority of New Jersey voters actually know about the line, a majority of them support ending it. So that's good, right? That already shows there's movement here. Now it's up to people to actually do more and act on trying to demand this of all of our elected officials. Yes, there's a litigation part of this, but there's also the part about what we can do in a democracy, because it's about voting. It's about demanding things from our representatives, saying this is not acceptable anymore. Stop doing this. So how do we do that? Well, one, there is actually a campaign, the Better Ballots initiative, that have been trying to put pressure on people. Other things is just making sure you're talking about this issue. Making sure you're demanding it of representatives when you talk to them, to all your elected officials, all of them. This is a party line is one of those things that it covers every single elected official that we have, basically. So tell them, whether it's your mayor or your council members, your state elected officials, the governor, the senators, Congress members, this is something that's a problem. You support ending it. But the other thing I'm going to highlight here in the next few minutes that I have is that it also helps us. One thing that brings more attention to this issue and other issues is to consistently participate more in democracy as a whole. Demand that our democracy is stronger, that it's more accessible, that we make sure that we are allowing voters in New Jersey to vote, and that we're not arbitrarily disenfranchising entire groups of people. So that's, we've been working a great deal on trying to do that through different campaigns. We're restoring the right to vote to people with criminal convictions, so that people who have been historically disenfranchised and shouldn't be have a say in our system. But there are other things. There are voter access things that we all need to think about. We finally passed early in-person voting this year, and we will have that in November for the first time, something we see all around the country. We've all watched it. We see people lining up voting the weekends before Election Day in Georgia and South Carolina, even in New York. And why we haven't been able to has been a challenge. So we've been advocating for this, and we had that for the first time. And I'm going to ask everyone here, I'm going to lift up something. In New Jersey, we will be able, in order to have this, in order to make this successful, we're going to need poll workers, and there is a shortage of them. So please, if you can, sign up to be a poll worker, pollworker.nj.gov. You can, it's an online application. You can fill it out. Do that if you can, or share it with anyone. It is a paid role per day, and it's important. You participate and see how democracy works, see the questions people ask, and see the challenges that we see on Election Day. And one of the other ones that every single election we see, we do election protection work with our partners, and it's the thing we see every single election in New Jersey, but there's lots of studies have shown that it is a bigger issue, is that we have an arbitrary voter registration deadline. 3 weeks, you have to register to vote 3 weeks before Election Day. We must have same-day registration. 20 states, DC have it. It works. It increases voter turnout. In states that have it, turnout tends to be about 5 percentage points higher. It showed the most increases in young people. It also helps increase turnout for Black and Latino voters. There was actually a report released yesterday from Demos that actually had this data that showed the impact on same-day registration for voters of color. This is important for us to do. Every election, we do election protection where people are calling in going, hey, am I registered to vote? Or they're not on the list and they're like, wait, so I can't vote on this election that everyone keeps telling me is incredibly important and I should go and vote in it. A similar point, last year, we did restore the right to vote to everyone on parole and probation. That went into effect March 2020. It's tremendous. It was 83,000 people who had the right to vote for the first time since 1844, essentially, in New Jersey. And I know that the lawmakers who pushed this, the governor who signed this, intended for them to vote in November. This was it, right? They were going to be able to vote in arguably one of the most important elections in our lifetimes. Between our voter registration deadline and Election Day, over 400 people were released from prison in New Jersey. They had the right to vote under our law, but could not vote in this election because they had missed an arbitrary voter registration deadline. These are things we do. These are things that are in our system, in our policies that we can change. So I'm going to put in this in the chat box in a second a link that if you can support same-day registration, the campaign to get that. But let me tell you something as I end this, and I will in just a second, is, one of the challenges to getting same-day registration is similar to the challenges that we see in abolishing the line and more broadly in issues. While they won't say this out loud, let me tell you something that is often discussed with same-day registration is that elected officials, worry about same-day registration because they can't predict who's going to come out to vote. There is that issue. That shouldn't be an issue. That is not how democracy works. That is how democracy should work. It shouldn't be about elected officials just being comfortable and going, well, we'll know these people are coming to vote and we'll be okay. That is a problem. And that's the problem with the line as well. It is about the people in power trying to ensure that the system protects them. And we, the people in the state of New Jersey, voters in the state of New Jersey, need to demand that they don't do that anymore. That's the only way to have a stronger democracy, one that actually is inclusive. And having the ability for all voters to participate is the only way we're going to get a government that actually represents us. Because Julia mentioned this, and I'll cite, I'm going to cite to stats from Eagleton. New Jersey is over 45% people of color, but our assembly is 70% white, and our state senate is about 75% white. We don't have a government that reflects this, and we need to change that. Thank you.
Thank you, Henal. Next, Arlene Perez. Good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Hi, everyone. So I wanted to be a part of this discussion when I was invited because I think it's a healthy discussion to have, and it's a good discussion that everyone should be having on a number of different issues, including this one. So I am, according to some people on this panel, one of those power players. However, this is Hunterdon County, and that's what I'm going to speak to. Hunterdon County is, for those of you that are involved in politics, understands that.
Excuse me, there's something in the background. I don't know if anybody has control. It ended, so, okay.
It could possibly be me, so I apologize.
Okay.
I will tell you that I am in Alabama at an equestrian clinic for my daughter, so I apologize, but I wanted to participate. So Hunterdon County, there are about double the amount of Republicans registered in Hunterdon County. So being Democratic chair there, I don't sure makes anyone a power player in any way in New Jersey. However, what I will say is that when I took over the county committee 7.5 years ago, we had a very small executive board, much older, much whiter. It's Hunterdon County. And that has changed significantly over the last 7.5 years. I think we've increased our executive board's full capacity of about 25 to 30 people. We've changed the age medium significantly. And obviously I am Puerto Rican and I am the chair of Hunterdon County. I am the only Latina in the state. So, there's been a lot of things said here and I don't necessarily disagree with most of it. I just think that there is different ways to look at it. In Hunterdon County, the way the line works is that there are county committee members that are elected. They're on the ballot. They are your neighbors, and they're on the ballot and they're elected to the county committee. They've made a conscious choice that being involved in the political process is so important to them that they're willing to do this on a day-to-day basis to represent your interests, again, as your neighbors, because that's exactly who they are. They appear on the ballot. They become part of county committee. County committee structure in Hunterdon County has these county committee individuals, right? Then there is like an executive board, and then there is a chair and a vice chair, and some other individuals that are involved. And so when it comes time to look at candidates to run for office, we reach out to various people. We reach out to the PTO, the PTA, the soccer moms and dads. It goes across the board to make sure that we find the best candidate suited to win an election. That is our job, to win. And so, we have increased our elected officials significantly in Hunterdon over the last 7.5 years, including taking a congressional seat, which has not been taken in forever. And we've taken a legislative seat too at this point, and we expect to take the Senate seat. And all of those things I do attribute to the line. So it's important. It absolutely is important. And so for us in Hunterdon County, it has been a benefit to the Democratic Party in order to get those progressive candidates and those candidates that actually reflect the Democratic Party to be able to win. And so, when we're looking at the congressional seat, which was extremely contested up until a few weeks until the primary, I think we had 7, 8, 9 candidates. I can't remember. We did screenings and we did all kinds of things to see how we could narrow this down to see who would be able to raise the amount of money. And we're not talking campaign finance right now. So we can deal with that on another panel. So I'm only focused on what we have at play today. And so with the amount of money needed to raise to actually beat an incumbent who was there at the time was significant. When I calculated after the primary, it equates to about $30,000 a day. So for us, again, it was beneficial. We ended up having a congressman now. And we now have 2 assembly. We expect to take the Senate. We've also taken a number of local seats and mayors and council people along the way. We have some really amazing elected officials that have come through that process. And so I think some other things I want to go through is, again, when you're looking at the county committee, just remember that they're elected. They're elected to actually do this. And for us, and I'm speaking again, specifically Hunterdon County, because I know that process very well, we hold an open convention where Everyone can come. We invite the public as long as COVID and those types of things, but we invite the public to come and to participate. Of course, the voters are only those that are elected to county committee because that's the way the process works. We do screenings and they're actually legitimate screenings. They're not fake in any way. And some of the questions that we ask during that process is, okay, well, how are you going to raise the money? What is your volunteer base to win? Because that's the objective. And so again, we may not like the money in politics, but that's not the reality I face every day. And until it changes, I'm dealing with the reality I have. And that's to get candidates that can raise the amount of money necessary to actually win these types of races. And so I think we've been very successful in that way. You know, when I look at this type of issue, I look at it from the perspective of our ballot, right? So we have 21 counties and every county has a different ballot. I don't quite understand the need for it. I don't understand it at all, to be honest. I understand that New Jersey is very locally based, right? We're all about local control. And so every county clerk has the ability to formulate their ballot any way they want. Our ballot is controlled by the Republican side because they still control most of the county level appointments or elected positions. And so we have our own struggles with the way the ballot looks, even though we have an amazing county clerk. You know, so when I look at this, I look at it from the perspective of how do we fix the ballot so that it actually is consistent throughout New Jersey, so that it doesn't cause confusion to voters, because to me, that's definitely part of the problem. Now, when I also look at the primary line, I look at it from my perspective, right, from county chair perspective, as an ease to say, hey, we've vetted these candidates through a legitimate and open, transparent process. And I know every county is different. So again, I'm speaking from Hunterdon, from a process where your neighbors were involved in making the decision of who would be the most qualified. And you may not like it. I understand that. But then I would tell you to get involved. Right. So every county committee has their bylaws on their website, and every county committee generally has positions that are either open or available. I know Hunterdon County does. We're almost maxed out, but we still have people that want to be involved. And so when I look at this issue, I look at it from the perspective of who are my volunteers, who are going to be knocking the doors every single day to get these candidates elected, because I know who they are, and they're generally county committee people. And so what we saw during this last 7 years when Trump won is there was a lot of groups that decided that politics and being involved was very important to them. They understood now the ramifications of elections and what happens when you're not involved. And so what we did in Hunterdon is actually open our doors as much as possible to ensure those individuals that wanted to be involved could, that they could become part of county committee, that they would be appointed to those seats or run for the seats if they were around. I want to say during that time, I probably met with a lot of different people at a lot of different meetings to go through what this process looks like, because it's actually interesting to see how many people don't actually understand the process at all. They have no idea what it means to be a part of county committee. They have no idea that their next door neighbor is actually the one in the room helping to decide who's going to run for office. Most people just don't know that. And it's just the reality of where we are and how people are voting. You know, some people don't even know it's an election. And so I understand we should have people the ability to vote the same day. I don't even disagree, but I do disagree with the idea that someone doesn't know it's an election. That's our problem, right? It's our problem when people aren't involved, when people don't care enough to be involved. And so what we saw during the Trump era is people actually cared. They actually wanted to be involved. They understood that something was fundamentally wrong with an election that allowed us to have a president like Trump. And so when this happened, what we did in Hunterdon was say, okay, wait, we've been around a long time. We know how to run campaigns. We have the money. We have the expertise. Join us. Let's see how we do this together, right? And you may not always agree, and that's totally fine. The point of it is to have these conversations and to talk to each other and figure out how we win, because ultimately that is what we all want in Hunterdon. And it works beautifully. I want to say we, again, increased our membership, increased the membership, increased the elected officials that we had, and it also actually helped the conversation, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. I am tired. I don't want to do it, but I do it because I want to make sure that minorities are involved, that women are involved, and that we have the candidates that represent my values and what I believe should be happening in our school system, in our neighborhoods. And so these people, when they woke up and Trump won, they were mad. They were frustrated at the process of all of it, right? And so when I look at it, I was frustrated too. Because where were you? Where were you before, right? Because I was working this political campaign. I was making sure people were out there voting. That's what I've always done. And so what we tried to do is make sure those people that now were energized enough to be involved in this process to come into the fold. Because again, we have the money, we have the structure, we've been around forever. The Democratic Party is not going anywhere. Imagine the Republican Party isn't going anywhere anytime soon, right? And so when they did that, they realized that they had, again, more resources at their disposal that they were able to utilize. And so what we also saw is during that same time period, some of the groups that did pop up went away. They went away within that year and a half. They weren't sustainable. They just didn't have enough energy to continue to be sustainable over the course of years and years and years to do this, because it does require that much time. We had people that were so energized and so part of the process, and then they were like, oh, wait, I actually still have a job. I still have kids to do. I still have all these other things. And it's very understandable. And then they kind of just ducked out a little bit. They weren't as involved anymore. They weren't the ones walking the door to door every single day. They weren't the ones raising the money to try to get these candidates into elected office. And that is okay. As long as they come out election day, that is okay. And so I think for us, it was really a benefit to have the line for us because it helped us win all of these seats. And I think it's also been helpful to make sure, again, that we have the candidates that represent our values from Hunterdon in, let's say, in Congress or at the state level or in the local seats. And so I just wanted to give a little more perspective so that you guys understood the full process, right? Not just the end process, not just the primary day. There's this whole cycle that happens before that. And a lot of legwork goes into that. And I would tell you that, again, every county is different. I can only speak to what we do in my county and how we handle it in my county. And that's not to say that I haven't kicked someone off the line. I have. And I have for very specific reasons. When I get elected officials that call me and say, Arlene, this one particular person is not helping us. It's not helping with our agenda. It's not helping put any policies into place. They're not doing anything we need them to do to be part of this team. And we're losing. We're failing on policy that we should be passing. We're failing on the ability to probably win again because this individual isn't helping us pass these policies that we think are so important. Yes, that person does not belong on the line anymore. They can run and they can try to win on their own. What I do realize is that people take the resources that come with being on the line for granted, right? And so if you want to run, if you want to be an elected official, and you also want to do things whatever way you seem to think that you want without a team of people around you, right? Your other elected officials who also represent the same people around you, then you better have also developed the foundation to be able to do that, right? You need to raise your money. You need to do the door knocking. And those things in Hunterdon, to be honest, it doesn't matter if it's a D or an R after your name. It matters that they know who you are. It matters that you're the PTO mom or dad or the soccer mom and dad. And because our numbers, again, our voting numbers are so low, we're winning elections by sometimes 5 votes, 6 votes. 50 is a high number for us. So again, Hunterdon County, very different. But there are certainly avenues to be able to do that, at least in our county. County level is a little different. That is definitely a little harder to do. Because we can't even win, right? Line or not, we can't win in Hunterdon County. Our numbers are just not there yet on the Democratic side to be able to win a county level seat. We probably will be there in the next 5 years, but those are things that we're dealing with. And without a line to be able to help us do that, I don't know how we do that, at least not yet. And I haven't been able to see it. So hopefully that has given a little more context in terms of what happens year to year, not just election to election, because there's work that's done every single day. And that there are so many amazing volunteers that do this without any recognition. And I think that's important to acknowledge because they've been doing it for a very long time and they care enough about the process to continue to do it every single day with no acknowledgement. And certainly no money behind it because none of us get paid to do any of this, and nor do I get contracts or anything. So Hunterdon County, I think, is very unique. I will also add that we've had the highest voter turnout in the state in the last election cycle, and that was 87%. So we are very happy with the things that we're doing in Hunterdon and the way we're being able to do it with the volunteers and the people that we have. So thank you. Hopefully I've been able to address some of it.
It's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Arlene. And thank you for being available from so far away this morning. Our final speaker, Whitney Quisenberry, is Director of the Center for Civic Design. Welcome, Whitney.
Hi, I'm going to take us right back to nerdery. Do a quick share of my screen so that you can see some slides here. And I want to talk about designing ballots that voters can understand and use. This is not something new or something that just we do, but there's some history. I have not worked much in New Jersey, although I was a New Jersey voter in Hunterdon County actually for many years. So I'm aware of and have voted on what we call a full face ballot. So to dive in, there has been a lot of work done on election design and ballot design in particular, starting with the EAC, Design for Democracy, Effective Designs for the Administration of Federal Elections, which is a really mouthful of a name for some really good work on ballot design in general. And work with Brennan Center that Julia's already pointed out on a report first called Better Ballots, and then the second edition was Better Design, Better Election, that looked at disparities in outcomes of elections that we could trace to ballot design. We've turned a lot of this work into a little tiny set of field guides that are 10 top tips on election design topics for election officials, because when you're busy running elections, you may not be reading the academic literature. And we've worked on a lot of kinds of ballot design, including ranked choice voting, where we wrote the best practices for our CV and have been working with New York City on their work. Although it's about our CV, I think it applies to everything. One of the things we found when we began working on ranked choice voting was that when we took all the different designs for ballots that we found from around the country and designed them in the old EAC Design for Democracy best practices for layout, a lot of the differences disappeared. That is, things that we thought were really causing voters to have problems on particular styles of our CV ballots sort of faded away. And because our goal is not for voters to spend their time figuring out how to mark the ballot, but to spend their time figuring out who they want to vote for. My work with full face ballots or row and column ballots goes back to New York State around 2010, when they were switching from the lever machines to the paper machines. Now, the question I kind of wondered was why, when they did switch over as the entire state to paper ballots, why all they did was take the same picture from the front of those big lever machines and say, this is our ballot. So, and there were a couple of reasons for that. One was that people do what they're used to. I mean, there's that always. But the other, besides tradition and sort of general conservatism about making changes, is that it was baked into the election code. Those pointing fingers are actually in the code and were just removed in 2018. It took almost 8 years, maybe it was more than that, to pass the Voter Friendly Ballot Act, which wasn't a revolutionary act. It was really a cleanup. It was, let's clean up the law to make sure that we could, that we didn't have ballot design that was being coded, that was being created based on an old machine that we weren't using anymore. And I'm going to let you stop looking at this and show you the thing that we designed. We started with a kind of what might it look like, even if we kept rows and columns, and moved into a new, but we're able to change the rules about what the ballot design looked like a little bit. When it was clear that the Voter Friendly Ballot Act wasn't going to pass in that first year, we actually flipped and started thinking about how much of this could be done within the law. What would it take to actually design a better ballot within the law itself? And discovered that about 90% of what we were suggesting could be done. That included things like taking the instructions from the ballot from over 500 words down to 150 words. So it just wasn't so much clutter, adding illustrations. But one of the most important things we did was work so that we could increase the size of the text so it could be read. That was one of the single biggest complaints in 2010 with the first year of paper ballots in New York. And the other was trying to create clear divisions between contests. So that you could tell where they are. There's no example here of this, but there are other examples I'm going to show you in a minute where some contests took 2 columns instead of 1, and all of those inconsistencies, those little bumps in the road about how you expect to be voting, make the sort of problems that everybody's been talking about people ending up sort of in an odd place. You see breaks here, right, where there's a one candidate, a 1-line break or 2-line break or 3-line break. And one of the things that I worry about those breaks is whether people will know how to jump over them. to see that there's something more to vote below the names after the break. It helps if it's one piece of paper in front of you and you're not having to scroll, but still it's a problem. If you don't know how voting works, you can't actually vote accurately. So one of the sayings in New York was vote every roll, vote every row, except for two of these contests, one right here and one right here. In these contests, it took 2 rows to be able to vote, to fit all the candidates in the paper. You also notice that compared to the last ballot, here's a ballot laid out horizontally, here's a contest laid out vertically. Why the difference? Was the shape of the lever machines they'd had, right? So this was just sort of a long history of what we thought a ballot looked like, but when we changed our system, we didn't catch the ballot design up. New York State has its own little oddities, like the fact that the same candidate can appear more than once on the ballot. And there was a lot of debate and work about how ballot would get counted on paper when you could in fact overvote by trying to vote for Palladino 3 times instead of just once. So all of these details make a huge difference and add to the complexity of it. And our advocacy around ballots is really just to say this, which is that the ballot is a machine for expressing intent, right? That's its purpose, is a way for voters to communicate to each other about who should be their elected officials. And anything that makes that ballot complicated to explain is just basically a bad thing. Because it increases the likelihood that someone will misunderstand it and will vote in a way that's contrary to their intent without even realizing it. Right? Why do we double it up? So there were enough candidates for governor that they went all the way across the top line and then they circled down here. It's because the paper width is fixed. Right. So one of the challenges of the full face ballot is simply that it creates limitations on the number of parties or the number of candidates you can have that are arbitrary based on the width of the paper that goes through the ballot scanners. Whereas in a party block ballot, it would just might make more pages, but that contest would simply go on for longer. And a 35 candidate contest is not all that easy to vote in, but it's easier than a weird wrapping. And you'll notice that the top parties are the ones that don't have another candidate in their column. The other issue that I think, I just want to say something about overvotes here, about overvotes and undervotes, because we mentioned them before. Overvotes if you vote too many times in the same contest. In Better Ballots, the work we did with the Brennan Center, looking at disparities between different ballot styles where similar populations were voting on the same contest, but the ballot layout was different, was that when there was a break in the flow, right, A, B, C, D, E, F, H, the chance of someone believing that that's a second contest is really high. It's especially high in rows and columns, whether it's columns and rows or rows and columns, that you might think, well, I'm going to vote up here and then I should vote down here as well, right? And so it means that anything that breaks the conventional easiest way to explain how to vote on the ballot and adds a except for is a place where a certain number of people may make that mistake. What we're seeing in current elections is that it takes what I call a perfect storm, right? It takes a tight contest. It takes an unusual requirement that forces the ballot into a bad layout. And it takes poor voter education around it. But Florida, which of course is our poster child for problematic elections, that's been true in all 3 of the cases, certainly in 2018 in the Scott election, where it was a very small number of ballots and in just a very small number of districts that caused a problem for no particularly good reason. The clerk had followed the rules in laying out the ballot, but because she had 3 languages and that pushed the first contest way to the bottom, they were missed. They just simply missed the contest for Senate. And you can't fix that after the fact. The other thing that I worry about a lot is equity between voters in different districts voting in the same contest. So the second of the 3 Florida ballot design challenges was Sarasota in 2006 congressional election. In one county, the congressional race was on its own page. In the other county, Sarasota, it was tucked up above this much larger contest at the state level. And no surprise, with this big heading in the middle of the page, a lot of people missed this contest. Now, there's no reason why it had to be on the same page, right? This is a machine, so it was a screen. It doesn't take more paper to have more screenfuls of contests. And the good practice rule is that it's one per. But if you have one per, two per, the chances that someone will make a mistake just gets a lot higher because you've established a pattern and then you break it. So if the same contest on the same voting system in two neighboring counties had different numbers of people undervoting by skipping that contest, is that equitable? We know it had an impact on results. That's why we all paid so much attention to it. But are the voters in one county having being presented with a ballot that is different enough that it in itself can present a challenge? And I think, as you've been talking about the line and the challenge of being at the top of the ballot, the challenge of being at the left side of the ballot, and the challenge of being placed in a contiguous block with the other candidates, it makes you wonder what happens in New Jersey when there are so many contests at certainly the congressional level that split across counties. And so it's not just that they're using, there are different candidates on that ballot, even county to county. Not a political scientist, but I think it's something to think about when we talk about wanting to have more consistency nationwide in our election system. Maybe at a minimum, there should be more consistency statewide in the way voters are presented with our candidates on the ballot. One of the questions I've been thinking about in preparing for this is the difference between rows and columns and rows. Because in Hunterdon, we have one, and in neighboring counties, there's another, which means that if you move a few blocks away, all of a sudden you're voting on a 90 ballot that's turned 90 degrees. And one of the things I think that is good about having the contests in the column rather than having the contest in a row is that it makes a clearer block of candidates, so that even with this gap, you're not quite as far away as you are if the contests are spread across the row. It'd be interesting to look at how many counties do which, but really one of the questions I think that is going to be challenging is if the county has so much control over the ballot, and the county is successful in using that ballot, and it's hard for a candidate to get elected without the party, then how do we ever get the will to make changes and to be able even to have the discussion about changes in a way that is focused on the voter rather than being focused on how things used to be? Because life changes and we all need to figure out how to change with it. And I don't think this should be something that should be pushed through. It takes time to do that. It takes time to think about it. And that leads me to my last comment, because I want to make sure we get time to get to questions, which is ballots can help voters to be successful, but obviously they have to be designed well. But some of the worst problems I've seen in ballot design come when you legislate or litigate into a rule about what the ballot has to look like, rather than making that any sort of consensus process to work through the problem. Left to their own devices, if there's a problem on the ballot, the answer that almost everybody will give you is to make it bigger. If someone didn't notice something, let's make it bigger and redder. And all of a sudden, the whole ballot is bigger and redder and redder and redder, and everything is fighting for attention. Instead of saying, oh, there was a problem, let's think back and let's look at what might have happened and how we could change that. And maybe we need fewer words, not more. Maybe we need just bigger, thicker lines around the boundary. Maybe very small changes could make a difference. And maybe there's a process for getting there. Similar to how citizens redistricting commissions work, maybe we need a citizens ballot commission to look at how things get changed, rather than asking people who are already invested in a system to be willing to change it. That's hard. That's just plain hard. And I'm going to stop there. I think I'm a little bit under my time, but I think a lot of, it was great to see all those other ballot designs coming from so many people. And I'm not sure that the details are as interesting. You know, the nerdery details are as interesting as they might be. I'm going to just leave up for a couple of seconds some slides with some references that I've been mentioning. I have a larger presentation about the sort of nerdery of ballot layout and font size and things like that. We have a good ballot design checklist. It is not really designed for full face ballots, but I think it also includes things that are that affect full face ballots. And especially as New Jersey with the rest of the country starts to begin to move more to vote by mail, one of the things that's one of the opportunities to break to shift from the full face ballot to a party block ballot. The better ballot for New York slides are up, and if you haven't seen the better ballots work and the secondary better design, better elections work, it's not just ballot nerdery, it's actually quantitative election analysis nerdery. I'll pop these into the chat, and I'm gonna stop my screen share, and maybe we can now go into Q&A.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you all very much. We have about 20 questions and 6 minutes, so I need a good ballot design of how you group these together to get which questions make it on the line. I would say we will be, as I said at the outset, posting a video of this program on the Eagleton Institute website within the next week, and we'll include there links to everything that's been mentioned this morning, the organizations each of the speakers are involved with, organizations that several of the people commenting have made reference to, including Better Ballots New Jersey Initiative and others, and to the extent speakers are comfortable doing it, access to the slides as well. So we'll try to, this is not a conversation that's going to end this afternoon or this morning. I want to group a couple of questions and give a partial answer and see what you all think. There are a number of questions and comments saying essentially it's in the interest of current elected officials for the system to stay the way it is. Why is it ever going to change, or how does one make it change? And the analogy that came to mind me also in thinking about this program was dual office holding in New Jersey, which was very prevalent, was considered not such a good idea by many people, that someone could be a member of the state assembly and the mayor of a town in the district, and that it was never going to change, again, because it was the current elected officials who were benefiting from it. And in that case, the New Jersey policy perspective commissioned a report that led to education on the subject and activism, and I guess maybe 10, 15 years ago now, it changed with a compromise. But it changed, and the compromise has worked out so that dual office holding in that regard is essentially a thing of the past. So I'm not, but I'd ask all of you, what do you think, to the extent you think change is needed? And Arlene, I think, has a different point of view, maybe, but what do you think should happen next? Or what do you think what should people who believe that this system should be changed, where can they best direct their energies?
Can I start on that one? I heard Arlene actually saying that she agrees with a lot of what we were saying, and I think I'd make the point that she runs a very different kind of party, and I think she does. All my research suggests that she does. Unfortunately, it's rather unique. If she could run the whole state, maybe we would have a better system. So I think there are three approaches to changing this, and I love Whitney's suggestion about a commission. I would love to see a commission that looks at many of the issues that Henal brought up, not just our ballot design, but all the remaining obstacles to true small d democracy. But certainly ballot design would be a very, very important thing to tackle. And you know, every panelist should be on that commission except maybe me. But I think that realistically, the lawsuit is probably the quickest way that this is likely to change, even though that's probably going to take years, but just because it is decisive. The two other approaches would be, the legislature could obviously move on this. I think we all understand why that is not likely, although we did have 21 candidates in the legislature this cycle who declared that they wanted a different ballot. And 4 of them were incumbents who got re-nominated. Several others were incumbents who did not. And then there are others who were first-time candidates who got the nomination. So we'll see. I think that is a slow path. The other approach is what Henal mentioned, which is the Better Ballot New Jersey campaign. And full disclosure, I'm on the board of the non-partisan organization, the Good Government Coalition, that is running that campaign. So, but that is an effort to work from the inside to educate people and to try to get parties to actually change in terms of the county committee members that make up the county organizations. And so it's a number of groups have signed on. I think it's at 68 right now, including municipal committees. So that's the base level of the parties. So I think those are the primary methods, but I want to vote for Whitney's suggestion. I would love to see the governor come out for a commission that really looks at so many of our remaining democracy reforms that are so desperately needed.
Thanks. Comments from other speakers, or I think at this point we really need to get the closing comments if you have any. And there are some resources that I see have been put up in the chat, so people who are watching this now can pick up some of them now, and we'll have more on the website in the next week or so. But is there anything anyone wants to add to?
I'll just add and say to what Julia said, this isn't an easy thing. It's not a quick thing. Yes, there's the litigation aspect of it. The only real way to do this is that understand that this is going to be a long fight and keep pushing it. Just because it's a hard fight doesn't mean we don't keep trying. John mentioned earlier, people care more about gerrymandering than they have in the past, understand it more than they ever have. And I know we've been working on, there's a whole campaign to try to get more redistricting reform. That's not easy either. They don't want to give up power there either. But that doesn't mean we don't push it. And the more people push these issues, the more you're going to have elected officials in hot water enough to at least be inclined to do it. And you see a sea change happening. The fact that most voters right now are against it is something, honestly, and that people are aware of it, is something 5 years ago would have been unheard of. So the way to do this is to keep talking about it and putting pressure on it. That's the way you can actually participate, join the campaign, do these things. But the only way to do this is it's not just writing it off as it's impossible in New Jersey. You just have to keep pushing, and you do start seeing change on it. It's slow, but it's steady.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I should say there are the comments and questions that people have submitted in the Q&A. We'll find a way to link them, make them available with the video of this program. But I want to thank you all for taking the time to do this and the thought you put into this issue before today and sharing it with people today, and thank those who signed on to watch this, and wish everybody a good activist summer. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It was great.